Have you ever seen a photo that smells like old money and cold revenge? In 2023, a single image broke the internet. It wasn't a scandal tape or a crime scene. It was Sienna Cross standing on the steps of the Pierre Hotel in New York City. In the background, her boyfriend of 4 years, hedge fund golden boy Julian Banks, is red-faced screaming at a valet. But Sienna. She is looking directly into the paparazzi lens, fixing her diamond earring with a smile that is absolutely terrifying. The press called it the breakup of the year. Julian thought he destroyed her that night. He thought she was finished. But 3 weeks later, the flight logs of a Bombardier Global 7500 revealed the truth. Sienna wasn't crying. She was conquering Europe in a jet owned by a man who makes Julian's bank account look like pocket change. This is the story of the smile that cost $1 billion. The charity gala at the Pierre Hotel was the kind of event where the flower budget alone could feed a small country. It was the annual winter solstice fundraiser, the stomping ground of New York's financial elite. If you weren't wearing at least 5 figures on your wrist, you were invisible. Sienna Cross was never invisible, though she preferred to be. At 28, she was a brilliant, albeit underappreciated art restorer for the Guggenheim. She was the woman who kept the history alive while men like Julian Banks tried to buy it to hang in their boardrooms. Julian was 32, a partner at Aurora Capital, and the poster boy for new money arrogance. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, the kind of man who checked his reflection in shop windows and treated waiters like furniture. For 4 years, Sienna had been his anchor. She smoothed his edges, wrote his speeches, and picked out the gifts he sent to his mother. She was the class he couldn't buy. But that night, the air between them was toxic. Julian had been drinking scotch since 4 p.m. The market had taken a dip, Aurora Capital was over-leveraged on a risky tech acquisition, and Julian was looking for a punching bag. "You're hovering, Sienna," Julian snapped, adjusting his tuxedo tie aggressively. "Go mingle. Stop clinging to me like a desperate intern." Sienna stiffened her hand, dropping from his arm. She was wearing a vintage emerald silk gown, understated and elegant, standing in stark contrast to the sea of sequined influencers Julian had been eyeing all night. "I'm not hovering, Julian. I'm trying to tell you that James Sterling is walking over here, the chairman of the board." Julian's eyes widened. He plastered on a fake smile, pivoting to greet the older man, completely turning his back on Sienna. She watched him charm the chairman, realizing with a sudden icy clarity that she was nothing more than a prop to him. A statuette to hold when the lighting was right. The breaking point came an hour later. They were leaving. The valet line was chaotic. It was freezing, a bitter February wind whipping down Fifth Avenue. Julian was agitated. He had seen a competitor, Ethan Hunt, leaving with a younger, louder model, and his ego was bruised. "Where is the damn car?" Julian shouted, causing a few heads to turn. "Julian, lower your voice," Sienna whispered, clutching her clutch. "People are watching." "Let them watch." He spun on her, his eyes glassy and cruel. "Maybe if you looked a little more like the women in there and less like a librarian, I wouldn't be in such a rush to leave." The silence that followed was louder than the traffic. A group of photographers, sensing blood in the water, raised their cameras. "Excuse me," Sienna asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You heard me," Julian sneered, leaning in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cheap malice. "I'm bored, Sienna. I've been bored for 2 years. You're dead weight. I need someone who shines. You just fade." He laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Take an Uber home. I'm going to meet the boys at Zero Bond." He turned away, screaming at the valet again. This was the moment. The moment where a normal person cries. The moment where the victim screams back or begs. But Sienna Cross didn't cry. She took a deep breath of the freezing New York air. She looked at Julian's back, the man she had supported through his anxiety attacks, his failed mergers, his insecurities, and she felt a weight lift. It wasn't sadness. It was liberation. The flashbulbs popped. Pop, pop, pop. Sienna turned to the loudest photographer, a guy named Rick, who had been stalking the celebrity circuit for decades. She reached up, adjusted her diamond earring, and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret that could burn the city down. It was a smile of absolute terrifying release. "Get the shot, Rick," she said softly. She walked past Julian, past the valet, and stepped into a waiting yellow cab without looking back once. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. Page 6 TMZ, the Daily Mail, the Ice Queen of Fifth Avenue. The headlines screamed. The internet, usually cruel to women, took a different stance. TikTok detectives analyzed the video footage. They saw Julian's red face, his aggressive pointing. They saw Sienna's composure. She became an instant icon of dignity. Hashtag Team Sienna trended for 3 days. Julian Banks, however, did not handle the fallout well. He woke up in his Tribeca penthouse with a hangover that felt like a drill to the temple and 47 missed calls from his PR manager. He laughed it off. "Any press is good press," he told his friends at brunch that Sunday. He had already replaced Sienna, or so he thought. He was seen arm in arm with Chloe Vane, a 22-year-old TikTok star with 10 million followers and a penchant for wearing neon pink latex. Julian thought he had upgraded. He wanted shine, and Chloe was radioactive. But something strange happened in the weeks that followed. Sienna vanished. She didn't post on Instagram. She didn't give interviews. She didn't run to the tabloids to sell her side of the story for a quick payout. She simply ceased to exist in the social sphere of New York City. Julian checked her location on their shared Find My Friends app, only to realize she had disabled it 10 minutes after the breakup. He called her apartment landline disconnected. He sent a drunk text 3 weeks later. "Stop being dramatic. I have your winter coat." It went undelivered. "She's probably crying in her parents' house in Ohio," Julian joked to his colleagues at Aurora Capital. But Julian's life was beginning to fray. The risky tech acquisition he had boasted about was tanking. Investors were getting nervous. He needed a win. He needed to secure a meeting with Titan Holdings, a mysterious European conglomerate looking to invest heavily in American fintech. The CEO of Titan Holdings was a ghost. No one knew who was currently pulling the strings. Only that the family behind it, the Thorne family, had money that dated back to the shipping routes of the 1800s. Julian was stressed. Chloe Vane was exhausting. She demanded he film TikTok dances with her and threw a tantrum when he wouldn't buy her a matching G-Wagon. He started to miss the quiet intelligence of Sienna. He missed how she organized his life. Then, exactly 26 days after the breakup, the internet broke again. A plane spotter account on Twitter, usually dedicated to tracking Elon Musk or Taylor Swift, posted a grainy video from Teterboro Airport, the private jet hub of New Jersey. Tweet: "Just saw the ghost herself. Sienna Cross spotted boarding tail number N1 Thorne at KTB. That's a Global 7500. Anyone know who owns it?" The internet sleuths went to work. Within an hour, the owner was identified: the Thorne estate. The jet didn't belong to a celebrity, it belonged to Alistair Thorne. Julian saw the tweet while sitting in a board meeting. He felt the blood drain from his face. Alistair Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. He was the billionaire. He was 42, notoriously reclusive, and widely considered the most eligible and difficult bachelor in Europe. He owned islands. He owned airlines. He didn't date influencers. He didn't date anyone. "That's impossible," Julian muttered, disrupting the presentation. "She's an art restorer. She flies coach." But the photos kept coming. This wasn't just a blurry tarmac shot. The next day, a paparazzi agency in France released a set of high-definition photos that made Julian's stomach turn. Location: the French Riviera. The photos showed the deck of a superyacht, the Obsidian. It was a 300-foot black beast of a vessel, anchored off the coast of Cap d'Antibes, and there, lounging on a white daybed, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and reading a thick book, was Sienna. She looked radiant, healthier, but it was the man sitting across from her that caused the shockwaves. He had salt and pepper hair, broad shoulders, and was wearing a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was leaning forward, listening intently to whatever Sienna was saying. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the scenery. He was looking at her. It was Alistair Thorne, and he was laughing. The caption on the Daily Mail read, "The upgrade. Sienna Cross swaps the hedge fund for the empire. Spotted with elusive tycoon Alistair Thorne in the south of France." Julian threw his iPhone across the boardroom. It shattered against the glass wall. Chloe Vane texted him 5 minutes later. "Babe, why is everyone saying your ex is dating Batman?" Julian didn't reply. He was too busy trying to breathe. He had told her she was dead weight. He had told her she faded. And now she was the most talked about woman in the world, sitting on a yacht that cost more than Julian's entire firm. But Julian was arrogant. He convinced himself it was a fling. "She's a rebound," he told himself. "Thorne is just using her. She'll be back begging for me in a month." He was wrong. The tour of Europe was just beginning, and the revenge was about to get much, much more personal. While Julian Banks was busy gluing the pieces of his reputation back together in New York, the Obsidian had weighed anchor and moved south. The paparazzi, hungry for the sequel to the breakup of the year, chartered helicopters just to get a glimpse of the couple. They were spotted in Portofino, then Capri, then Ravello. But the narrative was shifting. At first, the tabloids painted Sienna as a lucky rebound. But as the weeks turned into a month, the photos told a different story. Sienna wasn't just an ornament on Alistair Thorne's arm. In a candid shot taken at a cafe in Positano, Sienna was seen with a pen in hand sketching on a napkin, while Alistair watched her with an expression the world had never seen on his face: total, unadulterated adoration. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't barking at assistants. He was captivated. Back in Manhattan, Julian's life was becoming a horror show. His upgrade, Chloe Vane, had become a liability. During a crucial dinner with prospective investors from Dubai, Chloe had live-streamed the appetizers, chewing with her mouth open while asking the investors if they knew any sheiks who wanted to buy her feet pics. Julian ended it that night. He kicked her out of the penthouse. She retaliated by posting a tearful 10-part TikTok series titled "Living with a Narcissist," which garnered 40 million views in 24 hours. Julian's boss, James Sterling, called him into the office the next morning. "You are becoming a circus, Julian," Sterling said, slamming a copy of the New York Post on the mahogany desk. The headline read, "Hedge Fund Heartbreak, Banks Dumped by Influencer, While Ex-Girlfriend Dines with European Royalty." "It's just noise, James." Julian lied, sweating through his shirt. "It'll blow over. The Titan Holdings deal is still my priority. I'm going to close Thorne." Sterling laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think Alistair Thorne is going to do business with the man who publicly humiliated the woman currently sharing his bed? You're delusional, Julian. Thorne is protective. He's old school. You insulted his lady." "Sienna isn't his lady." Julian snapped, his ego flaring. "She's a strategy. She's playing a game. I know her. She's doing this to get a rise out of me. I just need to talk to her." "Then fix it," Sterling warned. "Because if we lose the Titan liquidity injection, Aurora Capital is insolvent by Christmas. You have 1 week." Julian was desperate. He did the unthinkable. He reached out to his old assistant Sarah, the only person Sienna still occasionally texted. He bribed her with a $10,000 bonus to reveal Sienna's next location. "She's in London," Sarah whispered over the phone, sounding guilty. "There's a private auction at Sotheby's on Friday. The Blue Era collection. Alistair is selling a piece. She'll be there." Julian booked a first-class ticket to Heathrow within the hour. Meanwhile, in a suite at the Connaught in London, Sienna was staring at herself in the mirror. She looked different. The stress lines that had defined her forehead for 4 years were gone. Her skin glowed. But it wasn't just the spa treatments or the Mediterranean sun. It was the absence of fear. Alistair walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He held a velvet box. "You don't have to wear it." Alistair said, his voice a deep rumble that still sent shivers down her spine. But I saw it in the vault, and it reminded me of your eyes the night we met. Not the sadness, the steel underneath. He opened the box. Inside sat the Star of Ceylon, a 40-carat unheated sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was a museum piece. It was worth more than Julian's entire apartment complex. Alistair, Sienna breathed, touching her throat. This is too much. People will talk. Let them talk, Alistair said, fastening the heavy stones around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin. For years you were told to be invisible. You were told to be quiet. Tonight I want you to be the loudest thing in the room without saying a word. He turned her to face the mirror. Julian Banks treated you like a housekeeper he could sleep with. Tonight you walk into that auction house as the queen of the board. Sienna looked at her reflection. The sapphire burned blue against her skin. She didn't see the broken girl from the Pierre Hotel anymore. She saw a weapon. Okay, she whispered, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. Let's go to war. The Sotheby's evening auction was the pinnacle of the London social season. The room was filled with oligarchs, tech tycoons, and old aristocrats. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. Julian Banks stood in the back nursing a glass of champagne he didn't want. He looked tired. The jet lag and the stress were eating him alive. He adjusted his tie, scanning the room. He spotted them instantly. The room seemed to bend around them. The flashbulbs outside had been blinding, but inside the hushed reverence was even more telling. Alistair Thorne walked with a casual dominance, nodding to people but stopping for no one. And on his arm was Sienna. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged every curve, backless and daring. But it was the sapphire that drew the gasps. The necklace was legendary. It hadn't been seen in public since the 1950s. Julian felt a physical blow to his chest. She looked magnificent, superior. He waited for the right moment. He watched as Alistair stepped away to speak with the auctioneer privately. This was his chance. Julian pushed through the crowd, ignoring the dirty looks from a duchess he bumped into. He cornered Sienna near a display of 17th-century vases. "Sienna," he hissed. She turned slowly. She didn't jump. She didn't look scared. She looked at him with the mild curiosity one might have for a bug on a windshield. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was cool, crisp. "You look tired. The bags under your eyes are new." "Cut the act." Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've had your fun. The jet, the yacht, the jewelry. Bravo. You made your point. You won the breakup." Sienna took a sip of her sparkling water. "I wasn't aware we were keeping score." "Stop it," Julian pleaded, his arrogance cracking to reveal the panic underneath. "I'm here to offer you a truce. Come back to New York. I'm willing to negotiate. We can get couples therapy. I can get you a better position at the Guggenheim. I can pull strings." Sienna laughed. It was a genuine, amused laugh. "The Guggenheim, Julian, I resigned 3 weeks ago." "What, why?" "Because," a deep voice came from behind Julian, causing him to freeze. "She's too busy curating the Thorne family collection." Julian spun around. Alistair Thorne towered over him. Up close, the billionaire was intimidating in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with presence. His eyes were like cold iron. "Mr. Thorne," Julian stammered, his salesman switch flipping on automatically. "A pleasure. I'm Julian Banks, Aurora Capital. I've been trying to reach your office regarding the Titan Holdings investment strategy." Alistair didn't even blink. He looked at Julian, then looked at Sienna. "Is this the man?" "This is him," Sienna said softly. Alistair turned his gaze back to Julian. "Mr. Banks, I am aware of your firm. My analysts have looked into Aurora Capital." Julian's heart soared. "Excellent. Then you know our returns are—" "Your returns are inflated by high-risk leverage that is about to collapse." Alistair interrupted, his voice loud enough that the nearby billionaire stopped talking to listen. "And your character is even more bankrupt than your balance sheet." The silence in the room was deafening. "I don't understand," Julian said, his face flushing crimson. "Let me make it clear." Alistair stepped forward, shielding Sienna with his body, though she didn't need it. "Sienna is not just my partner. She is my advisor. When you insulted her intelligence for 4 years, you insulted a mind sharper than your own. When I asked her if Aurora Capital was a wise investment, do you know what she said?" Julian looked at Sienna. She was looking at him with that same enigmatic smile from the paparazzi photo. "She told me the truth," Alistair said. "She told me that you lack discipline, that you lack vision, and that a man who cannot recognize the value of the woman standing beside him certainly cannot recognize the value of a billion-dollar portfolio." Julian felt the room spinning. "Sienna, you didn't." "I didn't lie, Julian," Sienna said, her voice steady. "I just finally gave an honest appraisal. You always asked for my opinion on your work. I finally gave it." Alistair placed a hand on the small of Sienna's back. "Titan Holdings will not be investing in Aurora. In fact, we just acquired the debt of your largest creditor this morning. Which means, Mr. Banks, I technically own your firm's future, and I plan to liquidate it." Julian gasped. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an execution. "Enjoy the auction," Alistair said dismissively. "Come, darling, the Banksy is coming up." They turned and walked away, the sapphire on Sienna's neck catching the light blinding Julian as he stood alone in the middle of the crowded room, utterly destroyed. But Julian Banks was a cockroach. He survived nuclear blasts. As the shock wore off, a new feeling replaced the fear. Rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had sworn never to call. It was a private investigator named Vargas, a man who specialized in dirty laundry. "Vargas," Julian whispered, watching Sienna and Alistair laugh from across the room. "I want everything on Alistair Thorne. I don't care about the business. I want the dirt. I want the ex-wives, the illegitimate children, the tax evasion. Dig it up. I'm going to burn them both to the ground." Julian didn't know it yet, but he wasn't starting a war he could win. He was simply digging his grave deeper, because Alistair Thorne didn't have secrets. He had traps, and Julian had just walked right into the biggest one. 3 days after the humiliation at Sotheby's, Julian Banks was no longer just a man with a bruised ego. He was a man with a vendetta. He sat in a dimly lit booth at the Rusted Anchor, a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen, far removed from his usual haunts. Across from him sat Vargas, a private investigator who looked like he had been slept in. Vargas slid a manila envelope across the sticky table. "You aren't going to believe this, Mr. Banks. I thought Thorne was clean, but everyone has a skeleton. His is just buried deeper." Julian tore open the envelope. Inside were grainy photographs dated 10 years prior. They showed Alistair Thorne arguing violently with a young, beautiful woman on a dock in Sicily. The next photo showed the woman crying. The final photo was a police report. "Her name was Elena Russo," Vargas grunted, taking a swig of beer. "Italian national, aspiring model. She was Thorne's fiancée back in 2013. One night they have a massive fight on the Obsidian. The next morning she's gone, vanished. Thorne told the police she ran away. The case went cold, but the family always claimed he did something to her. Thorne paid millions in settlements to keep it quiet." Julian felt a rush of dopamine. This was it. This was the kill shot. "Is she dead?" Julian asked, his eyes gleaming. "No body was ever found." Vargas shrugged. "But you don't pay a family $5 million just because a girl ran away." Julian didn't wait. He didn't verify the facts. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about destruction. He took the file directly to Maxine Sharp, the most ruthless tabloid editor in New York. She ran the Whispers, a digital rag that destroyed careers for sport. "Run it," Julian told her over lunch at Le Bernardin. "Paint him as a monster, a Bluebeard. Ask the question, is Sienna Cross next? The next morning, the world woke up to a firestorm. The billionaire's dark secret, where is Elena Russo? The headline was everywhere. Twitter exploded. TikTok sleuths dug up old conspiracy theories. The narrative shifted overnight. Alistair Thorne wasn't the romantic hero anymore. He was a powerful man with a dark past, and Sienna was the naive victim walking into a trap. Save Sienna began to trend again, but this time it wasn't empowering. It was fearful. Julian seized the moment. He went on a primetime interview with Diane Sawyer-esque figure, looking somber and heartbroken. "I'm not saying he did it," Julian said to the camera, practicing the furrowed brow he had rehearsed in the mirror. "I'm just terrified. Sienna is a sweet girl, but she's innocent. She doesn't know the world she's stepped into. I just want her to come home safe. Sienna, if you're watching this, please just call me." The public ate it up. Julian Banks, the reformed ex-boyfriend trying to save his love from a potential murderer. Meanwhile, in a secluded villa in Lake Como, the mood was grave. Sienna threw her phone onto the velvet sofa. "He's insane, Alistair. He's actually insane. He's digging up Elena." That was a decade ago. Alistair stood by the window watching the rain fall over the lake. He wasn't angry. He was eerily calm. "He is desperate. He struck at the one thing he thought I couldn't defend because I have never spoken about it publicly." "We have to issue a statement," Sienna said, pacing. "The board at Titan Holdings is panicking. Their stock dropped 4% this morning. People think you killed a woman, Alistair." Alistair turned to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were soft when they landed on her. "Do you believe I did it?" "Don't insult me," Sienna snapped, walking over to fix his collar, a habit she hadn't broken. "I know who you are, but the world doesn't. Julian is controlling the narrative. We need to stop him." "No," Alistair said, taking her hand. "We don't stop him. We let him overextend. Napoleon said never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. Julian just bet his entire existence on a lie. We are going to let him think he's winning until the very last second." "And then?" Sienna asked. Alistair smiled, but it was a wolf's smile. "And then we invite him to the slaughter." 2 days later, a press release was issued from Titan Holdings. Mr. Alistair Thorne and Ms. Sienna Cross invite the press and Mr. Julian Banks to the annual Titan Charity Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. A formal statement regarding the Elena Russo allegations will be made. Julian read the invitation and laughed until he choked. "He's surrendering," Julian told his reflection. "He's going to try to pay me off or settle. I've won." He had no idea that he wasn't the hunter. He was the bait. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was closed to the public, transformed into a fortress of wealth. The Temple of Dender was lit in soft ambers and golds. The press pit was overflowing. Every major network was there expecting a resignation or a confession. Julian Banks arrived like a conquering king. He wore a velvet tuxedo flanked by security he didn't need but hired for effect. He walked the red carpet, ignoring questions, smirking at the cameras. He spotted his former boss, James Sterling, by the bar. "You've got guts showing up here, Julian," Sterling said, refusing to shake Julian's hand. "You dragged the Thorne name through the mud. If this goes south, you're finished in this town." "It's already over, James," Julian scoffed, grabbing a martini. "Thorne is terrified. Look at the setup. He's going to announce he's stepping down, and I'll be the guy who took down a giant." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the massive hall. Sienna and Alistair emerged from the wings. They didn't look like people in the middle of a scandal. They looked like royalty. Sienna wore a dress of silver chainmail that looked like armor. Alistair was stoic. They stepped up to the podium. Alistair adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," Alistair began, his voice echoing through the temple. "For the past week, a story has been circulating regarding my past. A story peddled by a man who claims to care about the safety of Ms. Cross." Alistair's eyes locked onto Julian in the front row. Julian raised his glass in a mock toast. Mr. Banks claims I harmed Elena Russo 10 years ago, Alistair continued. He claims I paid her family to stay silent. He claims she vanished. Alistair paused. The silence was heavy. The truth is, Alistair said, Elena did vanish from the public eye. Because she had to. Alistair gestured to the side of the stage. Please welcome the chairwoman of the Russo Foundation for Human Trafficking Survivors, my sister-in-law, Elena Russo. The crowd gasped. A collective intake of breath sucked the air out of the room. From the shadows, a woman walked out. She was older than the photos, walking with a cane, but it was undeniably her. She looked strong, defiant. Julian dropped his glass. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. Elena took the microphone. 10 years ago, she said, her voice thick with an Italian accent, I was targeted by a crime syndicate in Naples because my father refused to pay protection money. They tried to kidnap me. Alistair Thorne didn't hurt me. He used his private security to extract me from Italy. He hid me. He moved my family. The argument on the dock was me refusing to leave my home and him saving my life. She looked directly at Julian. The money he paid my family wasn't hush money. It was to build a new life in America under assumed names. You, Mr. Banks, just exposed a protected identity and put my family at risk again for 5 minutes of fame. The room turned on Julian instantly. The press turned their cameras away from the stage and pointed them directly at his sweating, pale face. He looked like a rat trapped in a spotlight. But Alistair wasn't done. Thank you, Elena, Alistair said, stepping back to the mic. But Mr. Banks's incompetence is not the only reason we are here tonight. Sienna stepped forward. She looked at Julian with pity. Julian, she said, her voice amplified, did you really think Alistair would buy your debt without doing due diligence? Julian froze. The debt. He had forgotten about the debt. When Titan Holdings acquired the debt of Aurora Capital, Sienna explained, we gained access to your internal ledgers. All of them. Even the ones you thought were encrypted on your private server. Behind them, a massive screen lit up. It wasn't a photo. It was a spreadsheet. Project Icarus Illegal Shorting and Embezzlement. You've been using client funds to cover your personal losses on crypto gambling, Sienna said, reading the data. You've been falsifying returns to investors for 18 months. You aren't just a bad boyfriend, Julian. You're a felon. Julian tried to run. He actually turned and shoved a waiter aside, sprinting toward the exit. But the doors to the Temple of Dender opened, and they weren't waiters standing there. They were federal agents. 4 men in FBI windbreakers stepped into the hall. Julian Banks, one of them shouted. Stop right there! The cameras flashed wildly, a strobe light of Julian's destruction. The man who wanted the spotlight finally had it. He was tackled to the ground in his velvet tuxedo, screaming that it was a setup, that he was framed. On the stage, Alistair didn't even watch. He turned to Sienna. You were right, he murmured. The silver dress was a better choice. Sienna watched as her ex-boyfriend was handcuffed and dragged out of the gala he had crashed. She remembered the night at the Pierre, how he had left her on the curb. She reached up, touched the sapphire at her throat, and looked at the camera one last time. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. Checkmate. The fall of Julian Banks was not the swift, merciful execution of a guillotine. It was a slow, suffocating public drowning. The trial of the United States versus Julian Banks began 6 months after the chaos at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was held in the Southern District of New York, the same federal court that had swallowed titans of industry before him. But unlike the titans, Julian faced the jury alone. The courtroom was a study in gray. The marble floors, the overcast light filtering through the high windows, and the cheap, ill-fitting suit Julian wore provided by his public defender after his assets were frozen, all blended into a monochromatic nightmare. He sat at the defense table, his once thick hair thinning from stress, his skin pasty from months of house arrest in a studio apartment in Queens that his parents had rented for him. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued woman named Elena Vance, didn't need to rely on theatrics. She had the Project Icarus files. Day 3 of the trial was the most humiliating. Chloe Vane Julian's brief influencer fling took the stand. Dressed in a somber black dress that she had undoubtedly linked on her Amazon storefront, that morning she destroyed what little credibility Julian had left. He didn't just ask to borrow money, Chloe testified, wiping away a tear that might have been real. He tried to get me to sign over the rights to my LLC. He told me that love is a merger. Mom. He said that if I didn't help him cover the margin calls, I was just as useless as his ex. The jury, a mix of 12 ordinary New Yorkers who likely struggled to pay rent, looked at Julian with unmasked disgust. He wasn't a tragic figure. He was a parasite. But the nail in the coffin came from the forensic accountant. He projected a single email onto the courtroom screens. It was dated 2 days before the breakup at the Pierre. To VK Offshore Accounts. From J. Banks, subject liquidity. Move the client funds from the pension accounts. I need to cover the crypto losses before the quarterly audit. If Sterling finds out, I'll just blame the algorithm, or I'll pin it on Sienna's bad advice if I have to. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Julian didn't look up. He stared at his hands, realizing that his arrogance had left a digital footprint that no amount of charm could erase. He hadn't just embezzled. He had planned to frame Sienna long before he discarded her. The verdict took less than 4 hours. Guilty on all 14 counts. When the judge sentenced him to 12 years in a federal correctional facility, Julian didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply slumped. The golden boy of Wall Street, who once screamed at valets for taking too long with his Porsche, was handcuffed by a bailiff who didn't even know his name. As he was led out of the side door, he looked back at the gallery one last time, desperate for a familiar face. A friend, a colleague, even an enemy. But the benches were empty. The world had already moved on. While Julian traded his tailored suits for a beige jumpsuit in FCI Otisville, 4,000 miles away, Sienna Cross was standing in a sun-drenched office on the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. She was no longer just the woman in the photo. She was the founder and director of the Cross Restoration Institute, an organization funded by the Thorne estate, but run entirely by her iron will. The office hummed with quiet efficiency. Art historians, chemists, and international lawyers moved through the glass corridors. They weren't there because of who Sienna was dating. They were there because she was brilliant. Sienna stood over a large oak table examining a canvas that had just arrived from a private vault in Geneva. It was a 17th-century Dutch landscape stolen during World War II and missing for 80 years. "The provenance is tricky, Sienna," said Henri, her head of legal, a cynical Frenchman who was rarely impressed. "The collector claims his grandfather bought it fairly in 1946. He's threatening to sue if we publish the recovery." Sienna didn't look up from the microscope she was adjusting. "Let him sue, Henri. I found the original bill of sale in the archives in Amsterdam last week. The painting was looted. His grandfather bought it from a fence." She stood up, smoothing the lapel of her cream-colored blazer. "Draft the press release. And tell the collector that if he wants a fight, Titan Holdings has a legal team that specializes in protracted attrition. Ask him if he wants to spend his inheritance on lawyers, or if he wants a tax write-off for a generous donation to the museum." Henri smiled, a rare expression. "You are ruthless, Madame Cross." "I had a good teacher," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "And I learned exactly what happens when you let men take what isn't theirs." Later that evening, Sienna left the Institute. A black sedan was waiting. The driver opened the door, but she paused, looking out at the Tuileries garden across the street. It was raining lightly, the kind of romantic Parisian rain that usually signals the end of a movie. But her life wasn't a movie. It was work. Hard, gratifying work. She slid into the car. Alistair Thorne was in the back seat reading a dossier on renewable energy grids in the Balkans. He closed the file immediately, his attention shifting entirely to her. "You look tired," he said, not as a criticism but as an observation of care. "The Dutch landscape is secured," she said, leaning her head back against the leather seat. "We got it." Alistair reached over and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady. "I never doubted you would. Did you eat?" "I forgot," she admitted. "I thought so." He tapped the partition glass. "Driver to L'Ambroisie." They didn't go to the trendy clubs where the paparazzi camped out. They went to a quiet 3-Michelin-star sanctuary where the staff knew Alistair's name but never spoke it to the press. Over dinner, the subject of Julian finally came up. It had been a taboo topic for months, not because it hurt, but because it was irrelevant. But today the news of his transfer to a maximum security wing had broken. "He requested a visitation," Alistair said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "From you." Sienna paused, her glass of Bordeaux halfway to her lips. She set it down slowly. "Did he—" "The lawyers intercepted it?" Alistair continued, watching her closely. "He claims he wants to apologize. He claims he's found God or clarity or whatever men like him find when they run out of options." Sienna looked out the window at the Seine River glittering in the dark. She thought about the night at the Pierre, the cold wind, the way Julian had looked at her with total contempt, as if she were a stain on his jacket. She thought about the years she spent shrinking herself so he could feel big. "No," she said softly. "No?" Alistair asked. "I don't need his apology," Sienna said, turning back to Alistair. Her eyes were clear, devoid of anger. "And I don't need to see him. Visiting him would validate him. It would make him the protagonist of the story again. He's not the protagonist, Alistair. He's a footnote. Footnotes don't get visitations." Alistair smiled, and it was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "A footnote," he repeated. "I like that." Winter came to Europe, wrapping the continent in a blanket of white. For the holidays, Alistair insisted on escaping the damp chill of Paris. They took the Global 7500 to a private airstrip in Switzerland, then a helicopter to a chalet in Gstaad that sat so high up the mountain it felt like it was built on a cloud. It was just the two of them. No staff, no security detail inside the house. Just a crackling fire, shelves of books, and the silence of the Alps. On Christmas Eve, the snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets. Sienna was sitting on the rug by the fireplace, wearing one of Alistair's cashmere sweaters that swallowed her frame, reading a biography of Catherine the Great. Alistair came in from the terrace, brushing snow off his shoulders. He carried the scent of pine and cold air. He poured 2 glasses of vintage cognac and sat down next to her on the floor, ignoring the expensive leather armchairs. "I've been thinking." Alistair started swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "That's usually dangerous." Sienna teased, not looking up from her book. "I've been thinking about the concept of value," he said, his voice serious enough that Sienna finally closed the book. "In my world, value is calculated. Assets, liabilities, depreciation. It's cold. It's mathematical." He looked at the fire. "When I met you, you were being treated like a liability. Julian saw you as a cost center, something that required maintenance but offered no return." Sienna winced slightly. "You don't have to remind me." "I do," Alistair corrected gently, "because he was the worst investor I have ever seen. When I saw you that night at the auction wearing the sapphire, I didn't see a liability. I saw an asset that was undervalued by the entire market." He turned to face her. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. "But over the last year, watching you build the Institute, watching you handle the press, watching you handle me, I realized I was wrong too." Sienna frowned, confused. "Wrong how?" "You aren't an asset, Sienna," Alistair whispered, reaching into his pocket. "Assets can be bought. Assets can be sold. You are, priceless. You are the only thing in my portfolio that I am terrified to lose." He pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't blue. It was black. He didn't get on one knee. It felt too performative for the intimacy of the moment. He simply opened the box between them on the rug. Inside sat a ring that defied the trends of the billionaire class. It wasn't a gaudy knuckle-sized rock meant to signal wealth to Instagram. It was an Asher-cut diamond, flawless and clear as ice, set in a band of brushed platinum, intertwined with a thin line of emeralds, the same green as the dress she wore the night she walked away from Julian. "The emeralds remind me of the night you saved yourself," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. "And the diamond is for the future we build on top of that. Sienna Cross, will you endure the quiet with me?" Sienna looked at the ring, then at Alistair. She realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't being asked to support someone else's dream. She was being asked to share a life. Tears hot and fast pricked her eyes. "I thought you were going to say something about a merger?" She laughed through a sob. "I considered it." Alistair grinned, the tension breaking. "But my lawyers advised against it." "Yes," Sienna whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. "Yes to the quiet. Yes to the noise. Yes to all of it." The last smile. 3 years later. The scandal had faded into the archives of the internet. Julian Banks was a cautionary tale told to junior analysts, but Sienna Cross was a fixture. It was a Tuesday in May when she stepped out of a town car in front of the Guggenheim in New York, her old workplace. She wasn't there as an employee this time. She was there as a benefactor. The Thorn Cross Wing was opening a dedicated space for restored works recovered from conflict zones. The paparazzi were there, of course. They always were. But the frenzy was different now. It was respectful. Sienna stepped onto the sidewalk. She wore a white structured suit that looked like it was carved from marble. She looked different. Older, yes, but sharper. The softness of her youth had calcified into a beautiful, unbreakable poise. She wasn't alone. Holding her left hand was Alistair, looking at her with that same adoration he had on the yacht, and holding her right hand was a toddler, a little boy with Alistair's dark eyes and Sienna's determined chin. "Sienna, Sienna over here," a photographer shouted. "One look. Is it true you're visiting Julian?" The question hung in the air, rude and intrusive. The crowd quieted, waiting for a reaction. Waiting for the mask to slip. Sienna stopped. She looked at the photographer. She didn't scowl. She didn't cover her face. She remembered the girl on the steps of the pier, shivering in the cold, thinking her life was over. She remembered the jet, the sapphire, the trial, the quiet nights in the Alps. She squeezed Alistair's hand. She squeezed her son's hand. Then she looked directly into the lens of the camera. She smiled. It wasn't the terrified smile of a victim. It wasn't the vengeful smile of a woman scorned. It was the serene, untouchable smile of a woman who had won the only game that mattered. She was happy. She turned and walked up the steps, the doors of the museum opening wide to welcome her home. And that is the story of how Sienna Cross turned a public execution into a coronation. It's easy to look at the jet and the billions and think that was the victory. But the money was just the accessory. The real victory was her refusal to let a narcissist dictate her worth. Julian Banks sits in a cell today because he thought he was the main character of the universe. He forgot that you can't build a kingdom by stepping on the people who hold up the foundation. Sienna didn't just survive the breakup. She outgrew the entire world that created it. This story reminds us of one undeniable truth. The best revenge isn't making the other person suffer. The best revenge is becoming so successful, so happy, and so whole that their existence no longer matters to you. So I want to hear from you. Do you think Sienna should have visited Julian in prison to get closure? Or was her silence the ultimate power move? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'll be pinning the best debate. If you love this deep dive into the breakup of the century, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find more stories like this. Subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss next week's video, where we uncover the secrets of the Silicon Valley divorce that cost $40 billion.